Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 127, Structuring Your PhD for a Book. Now, this request comes from Sue. Hi, Sue. And it emerged again from that interview I conducted with Philippa Grand, Dr. Philippa Grand from Emerald Publishing. And it's an interesting story, actually, because during that interview, I was discussing with Philippa the nature of books and PhDs and so forth. And I said, actually, there are some techniques and some tips you can deploy right at the start of a PhD to render it book ready. Right. So I uploaded that interview with Philippa, and about 1 hour after I uploaded that interview, Sue sent me an email and said, in that interview you talked about how a book can actually emerge from a PhD and that you should start with the end in mind. Could you do a vlog on that? Well, Sue, your wish is my command, and let's get into this. So I'm going to present Tara's quick tips to ensure that if you start with the end in mind, you want a book, this is how you can construct a PhD around it. But there is, as always, a caveat in place for me. Remember, your responsibility as a PhD student is to produce a PhD. So you must configure it for a PhD, its oeuvre, its genre, its policy, its procedures, and you've got to think about your examiners. Now, the 10 tips that I'm about to give you today, do not take anything away from the PhD. In fact, they make a better PhD. So this is not remotely one of those vlogs, and actually a gentleman said this to me this week, oh look, a PhD is write 5 refereed articles, put some guff, I think it was guff, at the start and the finish, and that's a PhD. No, it's not, and that's how you fail a PhD. Good luck with that. But what we're going to talk about today is how right at the start of a PhD program, you can do some very interesting small things to make it incredibly easy at the end to produce a book. And when I say incredibly easy, all of my students have produced a book and quickly after their PhD. In fact, they've submitted their PhD, made corrections for 3 days to render it a book, and then submit it to a publisher. That's the scale of what we're talking about today. So I hope you enjoy it, but just remember, a PhD is a PhD. That's your priority. What I'm talking about today are some very interesting things you can do to render it book ready right at the start. So are you ready? Sue, you're a legend. Let's do this. So tip 1 is the meta one. It's the big one. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to do this one, because number 1 is believe in the value of books. Now, this is about you, and it is particularly tough to maintain this motivation and belief in contemporary Australia. Books matter a lot, but there will be many people in Australian higher education who say directly to your face that books do not matter. Okay, and they will be senior people. They will be people in power who will state books don't matter. Now, to be frank, they're nuts, absolutely nuts, because when you die, the first line of your obituary will be Tara Brabazon, comma, author of 30 books. I might get to 50, depends how long I live. Tara Brabazon, comma, author of 30 books, comma. But something weird, something odd happened in Australia about 15, 16 years ago. It was an anti-intellectual turn, and in fact it was the reason I left Australia and went to the United Kingdom. But of course I did come back. But let me tell you a story about what happened when I did actually come back. So I'd just come back from the United Kingdom and from Canada, and I was ahead of school. And I had, of course, a dean, and I just arrived, and as a matter of courtesy, I let her know that I was about to be on the cover of the Times Higher Education. My article was about to be sort of the cover story of the Times Higher Education. So as a courtesy, I sent her an email and said, just so you know, next week this article is appearing. And she wrote back to me immediately, and I remember it was a late Friday afternoon, Friday night. And the email was one line, don't bother me about your research. So I went, all right, well, I've just come back to Australia. Okay, I'm learning the rules here, so I'm learning what's going on. So from that moment on, I realised in Australia that really there's a whole group of people that believe that research doesn't matter at all. And so when people tell you the truth about themselves, believe them. So I never bothered her again about my research. I also remember one of my books that I produced in that first year in this post was mentioned by the Associate Dean Research. You know, he's logging through the publications of the faculty, and my book was logged, and he congratulated me during the meeting. And that was nice, sweet. You know, I never talked about it again. But when I got back to my office, an email from that dean was waiting for me, and it had one line again: just a reminder, Tara, books don't matter. End of quote. Now that phrase has burnt itself into my mind. You know, if there's anything that's wrong with Australian higher education, it's a lovely place, a lovely country, but really it's captured by that. Books don't matter. So since that time, I've really kept my professional life, the work I do, you know, in terms of the leadership roles I have in higher education, I do that, but I keep my intellectual life, my research life, very separate from that. And indeed, it's very much outside of Australia. And isn't that a shame? But that's just the nature of the gig. But look, this has an interesting end, this story. So of course, I did my probation year in this job, and 3 deans turned up to actually assess my probation document. Now, it had been a good year. I produced 2 books, 10 refereed articles, 10 pieces of journalism, all the podcasts, and I'd got a grant. And of course, all of that had happened with no research workload at all. And the books were singled out as a value by one of the other deans. And she said to me during the promotion, I always remember this, quote, "Why didn't you talk about these books through the institution? I didn't even know they existed." End of quote. So I looked at my dean, dead in the eye, and interestingly enough, she had the good grace to blush a little bit. And I looked straight in her eye and said, "Oh, I didn't promote them because I've been told that books don't matter." Okay, so this first point is a crucial one. I need you to believe that books matter. It's useless thinking you want to write a book if people are knocking you and you start to believe what other people are saying. Books really matter. They are the spine of your career. And remember, my 20th book is about to be published. And let me tell you, when I keynote around the world, they provide my designation at Flinders University, and the first sentence of the introduction is author of 20 books. So books matter. You have to believe. You'll be in environments in Australian higher education where leaders say books don't matter. Do not believe them. Hold on to yourself. Hold on to what you want to achieve. Okay, that's an important one. So the motivation, books matter. 2, pick a supervisor who knows how to write books. Now, this is pretty straightforward, but it is actually important. You know, anybody can sort of teach the oeuvre or the genre of this is what an academic monograph looks like, okay? It's much better if you've done it because you actually know it's an experiential ideology. But look, you can probably know how a book is put together. We have 18,000 books in this house, so that, you know, you can get a sense about what a book actually is. But why you need a supervisor who is experienced in books is because they can introduce you to people. They know how to write a book proposal. They know how to write a book blurb. They know how to go through proofing. They know how to introduce you to people in the publishing industry. So this adds enormous value to a PhD supervision. And again, you probably don't think about it unless you think, oh, right, I do want a book at the end of this. If you want a book at the end of this, then pick a supervisor who knows a lot of international publishers and knows how to get your book through. Okay, 3. Bit of a controversial one, not bothered. 3, integrated literature review. Do an integrated literature review. Now, I'm about to say something quite controversial that I rarely talk about, but I'm going to say it. I have not supervised or examined a PhD in the last 20 years with a standalone literature review chapter. Now, your disciplines might want a standalone literature review chapter. My disciplines do not. So therefore, I encourage actively an integrated literature review, because that can go straight into book publishing. So it's not a standalone chapter. See, in the old days, what used to happen is a publisher would look at a PhD. Remember, publishers don't necessarily like publishing PhDs, but the first chapter that would be dropped between a PhD and a book would be the literature review chapter, because they are incredibly boring. So you think about it, you've done all this work, and actually that's the first chapter that is just chopped out of a monograph. So how could you do this a little bit differently? Well, let me use here's one we prepared earlier. Let me use one of my wonderful students and his thesis to show you how we did this. And of course, this is the now Dr. Andrew Patterson. Andrew, hi. Hope you're okay with me giving this example, because I think you are. Now, Andrew was one of the rescue doctorates that Steve and I took over. And as we always do with the rescue doctorates, we read the entire thesis as it was. And I read his literature review chapter. One paragraph after another, after another, after another, after another. I couldn't work out what was going on between the paragraphs. It just kept going. And I just thought, oh no, what are we going to do here? This is just a disaster. So what we suggested to Andrew was that actually he reorganised the entirety of his PhD around topics involved in South Australian policing, which was his thesis. So we looked at death, drinking, women, post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth, sleep. So we had brand new chapters, so all the work paragraph at a time had to move into these new subject chapters, okay? And so in each of those subject chapters, we moved the bit of the literature review into that subject chapter. So for example, say the chapter on sleep, Andrew would do an introduction, so this is why sleep's important to understand South Australian policing. Then he would put in the literature review about sleep and policing, and then his innovative new research. So it's great because all the chapter talks to each other. So here's the literature, here is my innovation that transforms this literature. So it's all very sexy, all very integrated, all very convincing. So it was great for his thesis. It went straight through. The examiners loved that. That was great. But of course now he is producing a book. He is sending the thesis off on Monday. And so it is now ready to go. The integrated literature review has remained in the book, and it demonstrates he has expertise in this field and how his research is transforming it. So that might help you. The integrated literature review is the key difference between a PhD, an old-fashioned, I would argue, traditional PhD, and a book. So if it's something you're interested in, think about the integrated literature review. 4, select an innovative method and explain why it matters. So this is the movement from the how of the method to the why of the methodology. This is really high-level work, but wow, it can pay off. Because the second most boring chapter in a PhD is the methods chapter. Because, like, how have you done it? Yawn, 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 yawn. So obviously publishers are not terribly interested in that. But if you can pick an innovative method, particularly if you're working in an interdisciplinary field, and you demonstrate enthusiasm and energy and passion for this method, you show why this method is transformative, and particularly you show how it is transformative for the discipline, that makes an incredible difference. So methods are important, obviously, they're crucial in research because it's about repeatability, verifiability, accountability, so it's crucial. But if you can take one more step and show how this method is transformative for the discipline or the interdisciplinary field, then suddenly the method becomes incredibly attractive. And again, I'll give you another example of this from one of our former Flinders students, Dr. Michelle Jardon. We mentioned you last week, Michelle. It's all happening. Now, Michelle, as you may know, did this fantastic PhD on the art produced from women as they are released from prison. So a remarkable thesis, and of course that's about to become a book, so well done, Michelle. But her method chapter in it, which is about photo voice or photo voce, was really innovative, and she did something clever. She explored this really innovative method in and of itself, so that's great, but then demonstrated its value to the discipline of social work. Right, so of course Springer went, thank you very much, and that of course became a Springer brief. So if you can do methods well, firstly, if it goes into your monograph, your book, that's great, it's attractive, it's interesting, but it can also be a standalone small book. So do think about demonstrating that excitement for the method. So the how of the method becomes the why of the methodology. Okay, 5, writing matters. Writing matters. Look, I have a lot of students that pop into my office, often after they've completed their PhD and they've got their results back, they've got their reports back, and they say, look, writing doesn't matter too much. And I've actually had students that through formal correspondence have received like a D, so they've got to rewrite and restructure on their PhD. And I get them to come into my office, we have a nice chat about what's happening going forward. And the student, and they've just received a D, okay? And they come into my office and they say, oh, look, Tara, there might have been some typos and some spelling errors and maybe some paragraphs didn't make a lot of sense, but that's not a big deal. Yes, it is a big deal. You've just received a D on your PhD. So writing matters a lot. So in terms of a PhD, it is significant that the writing is clear, precise, it's about academic integrity, that the referencing is in place, so good, solid writing. So that's how you pass a PhD. To aim for a book, you've got to do a little bit more. You've got to show some flair. It's got to be outstanding writing, shiny, attention to topic sentences, strong, clear paragraphing, and yes, drafting. And if you produce great writing, obviously it helps your result. Your examiners will love you and you'll go straight through as an A or B. But further, if the writing is shiny and exciting and interesting, that of course leads it straight to a book because editors will also appreciate it. So remember, every hour that you spend on writing is a really important hour. 6, really important one, high quality introduction and a high quality conclusion. Now, of course, your introduction and your conclusion, along with, I would say, your abstract, are the most important parts of your PhD because you're orienting your examiners into what you're doing, why you've done it, and why it actually matters. So that powerful, that punchy introduction welcomes your examiner into your research. But can I say, a powerful and punchy introduction also welcomes a whole series of different readers into your research. So the introduction is important, strong. But the conclusion is perhaps even more important in a monograph, in a book, than it is in the PhD. And I can always see a student that's got tired or just run out of puff because the conclusion is either short or a bit weak. Now, that might be okay, we can sort of get around that in a PhD, you know, you'll get a major correction, sort out your conclusion. But if you want this to be a book, then your conclusion is everything because books end with a bang, not a whimper. So the conclusion has to be big, exciting, gutsy, why this research matters, why they should care, why they should give a damn. So powerful introduction, welcoming your readers into your research, and powerful conclusion that punches out why your work matters. 7, well, this is the biggie, this is meta again. 7, focus on the why. Focus on the why. Now, theses have particular requirements. You need to be rigorous, you need to show academic and research integrity, and you need to present an original contribution to knowledge. That's what a PhD is. Now, all of those characteristics make a great PhD, but it's not quite enough to make a great book. What you have to do to move from significance and original contribution to knowledge into a book is explain to editors and explain to readers why I should care, why I should give a damn. Because remember, examiners have to read your work. We pay them to read your work, okay? So they read it because it's part of their professional contribution for which we are grateful. But remember, if you're going into a book, people have to pay for a book to read your words, okay? So it's got to be meaningful for them. It's got to be significant. So you need an overt answer to the question in the introduction and the conclusion. Why should I care? Why am I wasting 6 hours of my life with this book? Explain it to me. Justify it. that's what a book is. So some of that justification can come into the terrain of why now? Why this research matters really now? Or when you read this book, this is how your life, your profession, your research will transform. Explain it overtly to people. Stay with me, spend the 6 hours reading my book, and you know what? This is how your life or your career or your research will transform. So therefore you need, as early as possible in your PhD process, a sense of who the audience is for your research. So yes, for a PhD, it's 2 examiners, and you need to remember that. 2 examiners, that's your audience. If you want to go into a book, the audience must be larger. So have a sense of that in disciplinary terms, in national terms, who you think will read this book. And that will transform how you frame and shape your language and your engagement with ideas. Okay. 8. Hyper-current references. Hyper-current references. PhDs that take a long time have incredibly dated references. So once more, the long candidature is the gift that keeps on giving, because by the time you submit the PhD, it looks tired. And it looks tired because the references look tired. And that's sort of bad enough in a PhD, and you might just get away with it, although probably not these days. But you will never get away with it in terms of a book. Really, in terms of a book, I would argue between 1/4 and 1/3 of your references should come from the last 2 years. It has to be hyper current. So when any of us publish, and this is a tip and a trick, I don't know if you guys know about this, but the tip and the trick is just before you finally send that book to a publisher, the weekend before you send it on the Monday, you spend 2 10-hour days finding references from the last 2 months. So I go through Google Scholar, go through Google, and find absolutely hyper-current references and put them into the book. So when it's sent on Monday, it is shiny and fabulous and edgy and looks really new. So just in case you needed one more reason to deliver your PhD quickly, just remember you need those hyper-current references to transform the PhD into a book. 9. Big one, great one. You must have a sense of what is your contribution to your discipline. Again, this is crucial for the introduction and the conclusion. It makes a very strong PhD if you have that meta sense, right? Well, what am I contributing to my discipline, to my field, to my profession? That makes a better PhD, but it is crucial if you're moving into a book. So how are you challenging, transforming your discipline? That matters. Are you making an interdisciplinary intervention? What is it? Why does it matter? Why does it matter now? How will it transform research going forward? Okay, 10, the final one. Don't bury the lead. Don't bury the lead. Yes, I've nicked that great cliche from journalism, of course, and I apply it to all my discussions of publishing, actually. So examiners will spend time trying to find the significant ideas. We are paying them. So they're with your thesis, they'll sit with your thesis, they'll be patient, and they'll try and look for the big idea. Oh, okay, right, well, okay, yep, there it is, good. So examiners will be more patient with you because they're examiners. Publishers, commissioning publishers, are very different. Now, in journalism, the big idea must be not only in the first paragraph, but if you can, it must be in the first sentence. Don't bury the lead. Have a great sense about what is your big idea? What's really fascinating about this research? And put that in your first paragraph. Put that, if you can, in your first sentence. Why do we care? What's big about this? What's exciting? And punch that excitement into your first sentence. Okay, so be gutsy, be confident, and show a mastery of your material. And that confidence will pay off. Don't bury the lead. So team, as you can see, these are the 10 principles I deploy from week one, from day one, when my students come to me and say, I want this to be a book. And a lot of my students do. So from day one, we implement these 10 very specialist ideas. And look, it may be in some ways structural. So the integrated literature review, the long introduction, the long conclusion. But some of it is also meta. So throughout the candidature, having a strong sense of who your audience is, having a strong sense of your contribution to the discipline, not only knowledge, but your contribution to the discipline. So Sue, I hope that helps. As you can see, some relatively straightforward things can be implemented to ensure a very smooth pathway from a PhD to book publication. Great idea. Thank you for the suggestion. And as always, I wish you love, light, and peace. TL.